Mr. Bookman here. Before I go ahead and start today's audiobook, do me one small favor. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you like today's book, make sure you do give it a thumbs up. Also, check out the comments for discussions. But more importantly, make sure you look in the description. You're going to see a link in there that's going to give you access to over 200 ebooks. Now let's dive right into today's book.
Crime and Education, from Miscellaneous Papers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. Charles Dickens' 200th Anniversary Collection, Volume 2. Crime and Education, from Miscellaneous Papers, by Charles Dickens. I offer no apology for entreating the attention of the readers of the Daily News to an effort which has been making for some 3 years and a half, and which is making now, to introduce among the most miserable and neglected outcasts in London some knowledge of the commonest principles of morality and religion, to commence their recognition as immortal human creatures before the gaol chaplain becomes their only schoolmaster, to suggest to society that its duty to this wretched throng, foredoomed to crime and punishment, rightfully begins at some distance from the police office, and that the careless maintenance from year to year in this, the capital city of the world, of a vast, hopeless nursery of ignorance, misery, and vice, a breeding place for the hulks and gaols, is horrible to contemplate. This attempt is being made in certain of the most obscure and squalid parts of the metropolis, where rooms are opened at night for the gratuitous instruction of all comers, children or adults, under the title of ragged schools. The name implies the purpose. They who are too ragged, wretched, filthy, and forlorn to enter any other place, who could gain admission into no charity school, and who would be driven away from any church door, are invited to come in here, and find some people not depraved, willing to teach them something, and show them some sympathy, and stretch a hand out, which is not the iron hand of law, for their correction. Before I describe a visit of my own to a ragged school, and urge the readers of this letter, for God's sake, to visit one themselves, and think of it, which is my main object, let me say that I know the prisons of London well, that I have visited the largest of them more times than I could count, and that the children in them are enough to break the heart and hope of any man. I have never taken a foreigner, or a stranger of any kind, to one of these establishments, but I have seen him so moved at sight of the child offenders, and so affected by the contemplation of their utter renouncement and desolation outside the prison walls, that he has been as little able to disguise his emotion as if some great grief had suddenly burst upon him. Mr. Chesterton and Lieutenant Tracy, than whom more intelligent and humane governors of prisons it would be hard, if not impossible, to find, know perfectly well that these children pass and repass through the prisons all their lives, that they are never taught, that the first distinctions between right and wrong are, from their cradles, perfectly confounded and perverted in their minds, that they come from untaught parents, and will give birth to another untaught generation, that in exact proportion to their natural abilities is the extent and scope of their depravity, and that there is no escape or chance for them in any ordinary revolution of human affairs. Happily there are schools in these prisons now. If any readers doubt how ignorant the children are, let them visit those schools and see them at their tasks, and hear how much they knew when they were sent there. If they would know the produce of this seed, let them see a class of men and boys together at their books, as I have seen them in the House of Correction for this county of Middlesex, and mark how painfully the full-grown felons toil at the very shape and form of letters, their ignorance being so confirmed and solid. The contrast of this labour in the men with the less blunted quickness of the boys, the latent shame and sense of degradation struggling through their dull attempts at infant lessons, and the universal eagerness to learn, impress me, in this passing retrospect, more painfully than I can tell. For the instruction, and as a first step in the reformation, of such unhappy beings, the ragged schools were founded. I was first attracted to the subject, and indeed was first made conscious of their existence, about 2 years ago or more, by seeing an advertisement in the papers, dated from West Street, Saffron Hill, stating that a room had been opened and supported in that wretched neighbourhood for upwards of 12 months, where religious instruction had been imparted to the poor, and explaining in a few words what was meant by ragged schools as a generic term, including then 4 or 5 similar places of instruction. I wrote to the masters of this particular school to make some further inquiries, and went myself soon afterwards. It was a hot summer night, and the air of Field Lane and Saffron Hill was not improved by such weather, nor were the people in those streets very sober and honest company. Being unacquainted with the exact locality of the school, I was fain to make some inquiries about it. These were very jocosely received in general, but everybody knew where it was, and gave the right direction to it. The prevailing idea among the loungers, the greater part of them the very sweepings of the streets and station houses, seemed to be that the teachers were quixotic, and the school upon the whole a lark. But there was certainly a kind of rough respect for the intention, and, as I have said, nobody denied the school or its whereabouts, or refused assistance in directing to it. It consisted at that time of either 2 or 3, I forget which, miserable rooms, upstairs in a miserable house. In the best of these, the pupils in the female school were being taught to read and write, and though there were among the number many wretched creatures steeped in degradation to the lips, they were tolerably quiet, and listened with apparent earnestness and patience to their instructors. The appearance of this room was sad and melancholy, of course. How could it be otherwise? But on the whole encouraging. The close, low chamber at the back, in which the boys were crowded, was so foul and stifling as to be at first almost insupportable. But its moral aspect was so far worse than its physical that this was soon forgotten. Huddled together on a bench about the room, and shown out by some flaring candles stuck against the walls, were a crowd of boys, varying from mere infants to young men, sellers of fruit, herbs, lucifer matches, flints, sleepers under the dry arches of bridges, young thieves and beggars, with nothing natural to youth about them, with nothing frank, ingenuous, or pleasant in their faces, low-browed, vicious, cunning, wicked, abandoned of all help but this, speeding downward to destruction, and unutterably ignorant. This, reader, was one room as full as it could hold, but these were only grains in sample of a multitude that are perpetually sifting through these schools, in sample of a multitude who had within them once, and perhaps have now, the elements of men as good as you or I, and maybe infinitely better, in sample of a multitude among whose doomed and sinful ranks, oh, think of this, and think of them, the child of any man upon this earth, however lofty his degree, must, as by destiny and fate, be found, if at its birth it were consigned to such an infancy and nurture as these fallen creatures had. This was the class I saw at the Ragged School. They could not be trusted with books. They could only be instructed orally. They were difficult of reduction to anything like attention, obedience, or decent behaviour. Their benighted ignorance in reference to the Deity, or to any social duty, how could they guess at any social duty, being so discarded by all social teachers but the gaoler and the hangman, was terrible to see. Yet even here, and among these, something had been done already. The Ragged School was of recent date and very poor, but he had inculcated some association with the name of the Almighty, which was not an oath, and had taught them to look forward, in a hymn, they sang it, to another life, which would correct the miseries and woes of this. The new exposition I found in this Ragged School of the frightful neglect by the State of those whom it punishes so constantly, and whom it might as easily and less expensively instruct and save, together with the sight I had seen there in the heart of London, haunted me, and finally impelled me to an endeavour to bring these institutions under the notice of the Government, with some faint hope that the vastness of the question would supersede the theology of the schools, and that the bench of bishops might adjust the latter question after some small grant had been conceded. I made the attempt, and have heard no more of the subject from that hour. The perusal of an advertisement in yesterday's paper, announcing a lecture on the Ragged Schools last night, has led me into these remarks. I might easily have given them another form, but I address this letter to you in the hope that some few readers in whom I have awakened an interest as a writer of fiction may be by that means attracted to the subject, who might otherwise unintentionally pass it over. I have no desire to praise the system pursued in the Ragged Schools, which is necessarily very imperfect, if indeed there be one. So far as I have any means of judging of what is taught there, I should individually object to it, as not being sufficiently secular, and as presenting too many religious mysteries and difficulties to minds not sufficiently prepared for their reception. But I should very imperfectly discharge in myself the duty I wish to urge and impress on others, if I allowed any such doubt of mine to interfere with my appreciation of the efforts of these teachers, or my true wish to promote them by any slight means in my power. Irritating topics of all kinds are equally far removed from my purpose and intention, but I adjure those excellent persons who aid munificently in the building of new churches to think of these Ragged Schools, to reflect whether some portion of their rich endowments might not be spared for such a purpose; to contemplate calmly the necessity of beginning at the beginning; to consider for themselves where the Christian religion most needs and most suggests immediate help and illustration, and not to decide on any theory or hearsay, but to go themselves into the prisons and the ragged schools, and form their own conclusions. They will be shocked, pained, and repelled by much that they learn there; but nothing they can learn will be 1,000th part so shocking, painful, and repulsive as the continuance for 1 year more of these things, as they have been for too many years already. Anticipating that some of the more prominent facts connected with the history of the ragged schools may become known to the readers of the Daily News through your account of the lecture in question, I abstain, though in possession of some such information, from pursuing the question further at this time. But if I should see occasion, I will take leave to return to it. End of Crime and Education, from Miscellaneous Papers. End of Charles Dickens' 200th Anniversary Collection, Volume 2.
Mr. Bookman here. I hope you enjoyed today's audiobook. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and go ahead and tell us what you thought about the book in the comments. But more importantly, don't forget to check out the description. It's got a link in there that's going to give you access to over 200 ebooks. And we'll see you next time. And remember, you are appreciated.